Sherri Papini had the kind of life that looked like it belonged in a magazine. She was a devoted wife and mother of two, living in Redding, California, with her husband, Keith. Petite and blonde with a sunny smile, Sherri was the type of woman who seemed to have everything going for her. But on November 2nd, 2016, her idyllic world was turned upside down, or so it seemed. That morning started like any other. Keith Papini left for work, and Sherri dropped her kids off at daycare before heading out for her usual jog. By afternoon, the world of the Papini family had spiraled into chaos. Sherri wasn't answering her phone. She hadn't picked up the kids. Keith's worry turned to dread when he used an app to locate her phone. It was abandoned on a gravel path about a mile from their home, lying neatly on the ground with her earbuds nearby. To Keith, it looked staged, like someone had carefully left the items there on purpose. Panicked, he called 911. "I just got home from work, and my wife's not here," Keith told the dispatcher. "She was supposed to pick up our kids. I found her phone." He was audibly shaken, his voice trembling as he explained the situation. Within hours, the search for Sherri Papini began. Friends, neighbors, and volunteers joined law enforcement to comb through the area. Social media exploded with posts about her disappearance. News outlets picked up the story almost immediately. Sherri's face, framed by her golden blonde hair, appeared on screens across the country. The narrative was clear. A young, beautiful mother had been abducted. Who could have done this? Was it someone local? Was it a stranger? Theories swirled. For 22 days, Sherri's family lived in a nightmare. Keith appeared on television, tearfully begging for his wife's return. The couple's children, too young to fully grasp the situation, reportedly kept asking, "When is mommy coming home?" The community rallied, holding vigils and fundraisers to aid the search effort. Then, on Thanksgiving morning, a miracle, or so it seemed, a motorist spotted a disoriented woman wandering along a rural road about 150 miles from Redding. It was Sherri. Her condition was shocking. She was emaciated and bruised, her long blonde hair hacked off. She had a chain wrapped around her waist and one of her wrists. Burn marks and scratches covered her body, and she had a brand burned into her shoulder. Her captors, she said, had kept her chained in a dark room, fed her sparingly, and inflicted various injuries on her. Sherri described her abductors as two Hispanic women, one older and one younger, who spoke Spanish and wore masks. She claimed they had kidnapped her at gunpoint while she was jogging and had held her for nearly 3 weeks before inexplicably releasing her. Her story gripped the nation. People were horrified at the brutality she described and amazed at her survival. The search shifted to finding these mysterious women. Investigators used Sherri's account to create sketches of her alleged kidnappers, which were widely circulated. But behind the scenes, investigators were beginning to question Sherri's story. Something didn't add up. For one, her injuries, though real, weren't consistent with the prolonged abuse she described. The cuts and bruises seemed superficial, and the branding on her shoulder appeared deliberate, as if done with care rather than as an act of violence. Then came the DNA results. During her medical examination, 2 separate DNA samples were collected from Sherri's clothing, neither of which matched her husband or her description of the Hispanic women. One sample belonged to an unidentified male. Still, without solid evidence to disprove her claims, law enforcement pressed on. They couldn't openly challenge a woman who had just survived a harrowing ordeal, or so they thought. Over the next several years, the case went cold. The sketches of the alleged abductors led nowhere. There were no credible sightings, no similar cases, and no suspects. But investigators weren't giving up. In 2020, 4 years after Sherri's disappearance and miraculous reappearance, a breakthrough finally came. Advances in DNA technology led to a match with the unidentified male DNA found on Sherri's clothing. It belonged to a man named James Reyes. Reyes wasn't a stranger to Sherri. He was her ex-boyfriend. When authorities questioned Reyes, his confession turned the entire case on its head. According to Reyes, Sherri hadn't been kidnapped. She had orchestrated the entire disappearance. She contacted him months earlier, asking for his help to get away from her life. Reyes, still harboring feelings for Sherri, agreed. During her supposed captivity, Sherri had been staying at Rhea's apartment in Southern California. She spent the 22 days relaxing, eating, and even watching movies. She cut her own hair, inflicted injuries on herself, and starved herself to make her story more believable. Reyes claimed he was completely unaware of her plans to fabricate a kidnapping story and said he only helped her because she wanted to escape. When confronted with this evidence, Sherri initially denied it. But the weight of the evidence against her was overwhelming. In March 2022, Sherri was arrested and charged with making false statements to a federal officer and mail fraud. Her arrest sent shockwaves through the nation. The woman who had been portrayed as a victim was now being exposed as a fraud. Prosecutors revealed that Sherri had collected more than $30,000 from a victim compensation fund, money she used to pay off personal expenses. Sherri's motivations remain murky. Some speculate she was unhappy in her marriage and wanted an escape. Others believe she craved attention and sympathy. Whatever the reason, her actions had far-reaching consequences. The time, money, and resources spent investigating her claims could have been used to help real victims. And her false allegations perpetuated harmful stereotypes, painting Hispanic women as violent criminals. In September 2022, Sherri Papini stood before a judge and tearfully apologized for her actions. "I am deeply ashamed of myself," she said, but her contrition didn't save her from a prison sentence. She was sentenced to 18 months behind bars and ordered to pay more than $300,000 in restitution. For many, the Sherri Papini case is a cautionary tale about deception. What started as a calculated lie spiraled into a national scandal. Sherri wanted an escape, but in the end, she trapped herself in a web of lies she couldn't untangle. Even now, the legacy of her hoax lingers. People still ask, why? What drove a mother of two to such desperate lengths? In the end, the answers may not matter. What matters is the damage done. The betrayal of trust, the wasted resources, and the lives impacted by her lies. Sherri Papini's story reminds us that not everything is as it seems. Behind the facade of a perfect life, there may be secrets darker than anyone can imagine.